Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's not talk about soccer.
Well, I have to.
You can like to sit beside the table and one chance to or another install laptop. So the tables.
Yeah, I think How are you? I didn't. That's cute.
Sandals or something. Just finished the pasta. So Bill, glad you crossed early. Yeah. I think you were trained.
Okay, welcome back. I hope you guys had a nice break. For our next session, we have a panel, and it's titled Connecting Academia and Industry with Open Source Practices. We have Fabian Lopez from DSS. We have Natalie Gabi from Agora Games, and Bill Hoffman from Kitware, Andrea Casillas from Open Initiative, Open Invention, and we have Don Hewitt from Ocera. And Luis Ibanez will be doing the moderating for the panel.
So thank you for joining us, and thank you for the panelists for participating. So what we want to do today is it's a very informal and very conversational session. We'll do kind of rapid conversation with the panelists, and you are all welcome to post questions and object and process as needed. We don't engage in violence, please. So what we want to talk about is the topic of how academia and open source interact, well, in both directions. So how can academia take better advantage of open source, and how organizations that rely on open source, what do they need from academia for things to improve? So let me start by allowing each one of the panelists to say a few words about them. And we'll go in the format of 30 seconds, measured with an Android phone that is open source. So please, Don, if you don't mind to start.
Ocera is in an interesting position in that Ocera was formed because the Department of Veterans Affairs needed a mechanism to get their hospital EHR Vista software into the open source world. And frankly, were unable to do it from within Veterans Affairs. So they literally formed a nonprofit corporation to take custody of Vista and make it available in open source. It says a couple of things. One is that it's hard to do, but also it reflects the necessity for some software, particularly where you have software, you have literally hundreds of thousands of person hours invested in a piece of software. The maintenance cost of this to the VA is becoming unmanageable. And Roger Baker, who was at the time the CIO of VA, made a very interesting decision. He said, I can't sustain this. I have to take it outside. And so literally, if you think about what that means in terms of the classical software model, it means that that model ceased to function for the VA. It could not handle what was happening to the VA's software. And so you get a company called the Open Source Electronics Health Record Agent, Ocera, whose sole purpose is to bring it out into the community and literally betting the farm that the open source model would bring input from the community and participation necessary to sustain this critical software for the veterans. So just to give you an example of how critical open source can be, particularly to the government, literally the creation of Ocera is an example in itself.
Andrea?
Yep, I'm Andrea Casillas. I work for Open Invention Network, but within Open Invention Network, I run the Linux Defenders program. So really quick, Open Invention Network is more or less a defensive patent pool that our main purpose and our mission is to create a no-fly zone around Linux and open source. So what happens is we have people that freely license our patent pool on the condition that they plead non-aggression. So it was started by IBM, NEC, Sony, Red Hat, Philips, and they all recognized that Linux particularly, but open source generally, was important enough to keep that integrity. Linux Defenders program more focuses on patent reform and kind of counteracting bad patents or low patents that are of low quality. So what I do is focus on patents either at the application stage or post-issue or even before they're even thought of, and just try to get prior art to the examiner so that they never grant these patents, but then if they do, then we'll protect our licensees and go after bad patents.
Thank you. Bill?
Okay, I'm Bill Hoffman from Kitware. We're a company based out of Clifton Park. We're a scientific computing company that is based around an open source project called the Visualization Toolkit. The toolkit was actually created by some people while they were working at GE Research and Development as example software for a textbook. GE liked to employ authors, but they're not necessarily going to pay them to write a book, so they gave them permission to do it on their own time and to actually hold the copyright of anything they did. And they created this software, and then it started taking off, and a lot of people were using it, and we thought we could make a go of a company that supported it. That was 1998. We're about 110 now. We've got an office in North Carolina, and Lyon, France, and a small office in Santa Fe right now.
Hello, my name is Itali. I work for a company called Lore Games. We integrate with a lot of the popular games to bring their data online. We build a lot of open source tools and use a lot of open source tools, from databases to front-end stacks for web servers, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I'm Fabian Lopez from DSS. Our company has more than 20 years working with the Department of Veteran Affairs. We are developing components that work with the system Vista. The one that was mentioned this morning is going to be installed in this state on OMA. So what we did in our company a few years ago was to take the system from the VA. We did some changes. We're going to present those later today. And we started implementing the system outside the VA. And that system is currently used in Oklahoma, Department of Veteran Affairs, West Virginia, Maryland, outside the United States, in India, Jordan, and very soon in UK and Ireland. So we also create, we call the Vista Extension Hub. It's kind of the app store for the system Vista, where we're trying to publish information about open source extensions and proprietary extensions that work with Vista. And we are sponsoring, we call the Vista Extension Challenge. It's going to be in October, where we invite developers of open source applications to develop healthcare applications that run with Vista. We are supporting the OSERA organization, as well as many events related to the open source. And we think there is a space that with both commercial and open source can work together, so we're trying to do.
Okay. Thank you. So let's start with a couple of questions on how we bring academia and research organizations to work better together. So let me start throwing this question to the panel, and we see circle around it. So what do you think that academia today can do or should change on the way they train their students to fit better in the culture of open source organizations? Do you want to take it in any order, or we just go in order?
I think ladies first.
Okay, I can well, I think that what Luis, your team is doing in this university can be a model for other institutions. I think there is a lot of space in the future, professional careers in that direction. Sometimes there is a confusion when they say open source is free, it's not going to be any cash flow coming, so they basically remove from their mindset. I think that's maybe it was before, but I think it's changing. There are a lot of people that is funding open source projects. So developers can work and also get paid for that. We have experience with the hospital in Oroville, California. They pay developers to do an application, and now they're going to release that as an open source. So they can be in both sides. They can get paid, they can be part of the community, they can work with other developers, and they get paid for that, and then they can donate maybe their time to those projects they're not getting funds. But the idea that we are trying to work together is to get that support to open source projects.
From our point of view, getting people involved in open source earlier helps for hiring reasons. It's one of the best resumes. So the sooner that college students can actually learn about open source and actually contribute to it, it helps them in their career, and also just people finding the right people to work for them.
Okay. I think one of the talks I saw here today about using Linux as a classroom tool is something I'd like to see more, because today I think more than any other time in history, students have access to really useful code bases, things that do things that they've seen before. I mean, they all use their Android phones. Well, hey, what do you know? You can actually get the source code of this. That's something interesting. You need something interesting that grab the students and then teach them useful things, like how to use the tools that create apps on the phones, how to understand how an operating system works by taking it apart. And these things, 20 years ago you couldn't have done that. You can do it now, but I'm not convinced that the schools have caught up to, hey, there's this huge code base out there, and we can use these tools to teach the kids. I mean, I got into software when I was like 13 years old on a TRS-80, because back then, all the games that came on my computer, it was like all text-based graphics games, whatever. Anyways, they all came and they were in source code, because the only thing that computer had was a basic interpreter, and it was built into the ROM. And that's so anybody that wrote games, and I learned how to program because I went in and I hacked the games so that I could do better or whatever. And that's how I got interested in programming. And I think taking advantage of big open source interesting things and using them as a teaching tool would be something I'd like to see more.
So for us, what we're trying to do is actually shift the way that people innovate. Like what you mentioned, everyone needs to publish. Well, the same thing for inventors. You need to invent. Where are your patents? So what we're trying to show is people are still inventing, but doing it in more healthier ways, right? We don't want to invent for the sake of inventing. We want quality patents being issued. So the way that we do it through Open Invention Network is actually work with students, either on trying to get rid of patent applications that have been issued, or not issued, that have been published. So we use crowdsourcing to get the community to respond to what's actually inventive, or defensive publications. So creating prior art to show the patent examiner that students are doing this. This is already the state of technology, therefore it's not inventive. But there's no way to show that unless you get a patent, or that's how it was in the past. What we want to do is bring in this new wave of innovation through non-patenting means, at least in software, to show that we're still inventing, we can still publish these works, and there's still quality, but you don't need the patent to prove it.
It's interesting to see what's happening in the software market right now, and I was commenting to Lisa and Andrea beforehand. And there's almost some tribal warfare going on out there, in the sense that there are people who believe passionately that open source is the complete future, and there will at some point never be another software patent. You also have people who claim, from a business standpoint, that that they still feel that open source software can't be taken seriously. I mean, they're not charging for it, so how much can it be worth? And I tend to be somewhat middle of the road on this. I believe going forward that there is adequate room for both approaches to software, and in fact some areas where one absolutely dominates the other. And so when you talk about how to prepare students, I think there was a young man earlier today who asked a very pragmatic question. If I take this course, will it help me get a job in IT? right? So that's a relevant question for students. And for industry, the relevant question is, how do we want people trained that are coming into the IT workforce? And I think part of and one of the reasons we're here in sponsoring this is the open source principles and methodology need to be a part of the IT curriculum today because they're real. Okay? And anybody who's going forward into IT needs to be capable of working in either environment or sometimes in both environments, in which, for example, in some cases, going to be using a commercial tool and having to maintain it and update and understand that they're never going to see the source. And in other cases, realize if they're building an application that this is something that would be great in the open source community and ought to be done collaboratively, and realize the benefits and then how to do it. And realize that we've gone past the point where open source code is hobbyist code. This is real stuff. They need to know that sometimes, rather than reinvent the wheel, they need to go look in the open source domain and find out if this has already been done by somebody. Okay? And so if you've got someone who's coming out of the IT curriculum who doesn't understand that that code is out there and how to use it, they're handicapped. They're not going to be able to function effectively in today's environment. So bottom line, it needs to be a part of the IT curriculum right alongside all the other disciplines.
Just one comment I would like to add is one of the words you use is collaboration. One of the best skills that you can learn working in open source is learn how to work with the community, with your peer, with all the developers. Learn how to share, learn how to accept feedback, because you're going to be sharing code, they're going to send you feedback about your code. As a company, we already check on that kind of stuff if the person is really ready to start working as a team. And the other concept is agile development. So if you had a chance to learn about Scrum or agile development, and then start being engaged in different open source projects, that will give you the background for you to be hired by any company that are looking for students and specialists that they know how to play as a team member.
And let me throw the question backwards. So, as organizations that support open source, what do you think that should be your engagement with academia to help academia get there? How can you help? What opportunities would you like to explore to join them from the other side? Yeah.
Okay. First, the way I would like to see is, well, that's the reason we're here supporting this event. We try to give the opportunity to all the students that will really have the passion about software, innovation, inventions, and I think the way we can help is give them the opportunity to be engaged with real projects. So when we have projects that are close to their location, invite them to be part, because the project has many components. You have project management, you have documentation development, training development, configuration. So it doesn't matter what kind of skill, it's just no one team. For implementation of the system like Vista, which has more than 100 modules and it takes more than 18 months to 5 years, you need different type of resources. So for us, I think it's the way we can help is try to get them engaged on real projects so they can start having the feeling of interacting with the other professionals that are already in the area.
Kind of along the same lines, I mean, for companies to bring college students in for internships or co-ops just to help get them involved in company internals and using open source, that when leaving there, going back to school, they'll bring that back and share it with other college students and help progress that through.
Do you have an internship program?
We do, yeah.
How long?
Well, usually it depends on the student. So if he's available for 3 months, he or she 3 months and 3 months. If a year, we've had a year. So it all depends on the student.
Yeah. So internships are a great way for companies to engage schools.
If you have really ambitious employees, you can have them do adjunct courses.
There's probably not too many Luises floating around the world. Yeah, I think that the company, engaging the students on, if you do have open source software, looking at and you are involved in some sort of community, looking for students, you know, if they're local, letting them know that they can contact you or come down to your place of business and see what's going on. You know, perhaps host some sort of hackathon or something at your company that they might be interested in if you're involved in an open source project.
So for us, it's definitely to engage, but there is a level of, I guess, education that we need to provide to students outside of the legal world. They need to know about patents and, you know, there's a copyright. They need to know about the IP that's surrounding it, because what we're seeing now is that you can't passively invent. You have people going at, or companies or non-practicing entities, whatever you want to call them, going after small inventors just the same as they're going after the big companies. So you need to be proactive in what you're creating and proactively protect that in whatever way, you know, we're trying to protect it. You want to protect it in, but just to know your options is I think really important for all students in academia.
You catch us right in the middle of trying to define an academic affiliate program for Ocera, as you know, because you're working with us. But obviously it's a two-way street. On the one hand, we'd like to make it easier for students to participate in the Ocera open source community, especially those students who are interested in electronic health record type software. And we're going to try to make it possible for them to contribute to the code base as individuals or as teams. But it also, I would like, as we go forward, we're probably going to try to have a sort of a visitation program where someone from Ocera can come back to the school and make an appearance in one or more of the classes and try to convey to the students what it's like out there. Although I was a grad student before most of you were born, but there was in the environment, in the academic environment, you don't necessarily have a really good picture of what's happening in the marketplace, in the commercial marketplace. And I valued a lot when I was a grad student, when we heard from people, the fellows that came in to work, they came in and talked to us. So I think we're going to try to get some two-way communication going with the students and let them know what's happening.
So let's do this the open source way and ask the audience. So as member of the academic community, what would you like to see? What are your questions and challenges for interacting with open source software and organizations that support open source software? Yes.
Is there any way that like a company could have a project that may be done and be able to hand it off to like a class to get it done in a semester's time?
The simple answer is yes. That it depends obviously on the cooperation between the university and the company. But there are plenty of precedents for trying to spin off projects like that. But the key, of course, is defining the project. It's got to be something that is doable, and it's doable within the semester. The last thing you want is get the students knee deep in something like that and not be able to finish it. So you got to package. But certainly that's a valid way to do things.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we don't do it for our class, but like right now we have one student from RPI that's kind of on an internship that I think he's there for 2 months, and one of the projects is like build a game, integrate it with our stuff, tell us what you learned, and then we'll learn from you how our tools around game development are. So stuff like that. And then that's going to be open source when it's done with it.
And we are promoting we call the Vista Extension Challenge. Basically, the idea is to maybe a doctor and a developer, they can work together and develop an extension. They can publish the extension on the Vista Extension Hub, and maybe have hospital they can use it and test it. But that could be also part of a class, a project, and then we can publish it there. We were also thinking about maybe sponsoring a trip to some of those students to the actual meetings. They have a conference related to the event, like a Vista conference or Ocera Summit, where they can really see how big the community is and see if they like that area of work.
I can add one more thing. We were actually approached in a recent meeting with some senior managers from Veterans Affairs And one of the comments from one of the guys in the Office of Information Technology is, we have a list of bugs, for Vista within VA that is so long that we know that there are small, low priority bugs in this list that we will never in this lifetime get to, period. And this guy's, you could sort of see the open source light coming on for him. He says, what if we were to put some of these bugs out and put them in front of the community and ask people if they'd like to try to fix them? A, for the exercise and the fun of it, and B, to benefit the veterans. And so we're trying to do some work on getting that kind of program going. One thing we have found out is it's a lot easier to take code out of the VA than it is to put that into the VA. The panel's laughing because they understand the amount of bureaucracy involved in code intake for any of the government systems, right? So we got to work on that. That's a challenge for us. But the notion of being able to put some real bugs out there and get a class to get together and say, you know what, we're going to take these 3 and try to fix them during the semester. What a cool thing.
And tomorrow morning, I think Chris maybe can mention the workshop. It's going to be kind of exercise in that area. We
got 3 in softball, I thought you mentioned.
But that's kind of the pilot test of that idea. We got some bugs. Maybe you can explain that.
Sure. So tomorrow morning, we have a follow-up event. We have a workshop where we'll be working on Vista. So we have a classroom and we have people with expertise on the system. They will be mentoring students, and doing that kind of cross-pollination. And it goes both ways. So we are looking for the contributions of the students, and the students will benefit from the training. Yes.
We actually did something similar, Luis,
Yes.
for an RPI class where the students wrote defensive publications based on what they were working on. And I thought it went really well. I was impressed with the quality of publications that they submitted. And they got to learn about the whole idea of doing the defensive publication, what it means, and how it could benefit you as a student going on to the real world.
So I think it's kind of a two-way street as well. I mean, it certainly is possible to come up with something, but it does take a lot of work to compartmentalize that chunk. Like, it's almost like teaching a course. You have to come up with the lesson plan or whatever, for every hour of lecture, what it takes like 3 hours of preparation or something like that. So for every 10 hours of coding, it's probably there's another 20 hours of figuring out how to ask the question right and pose it. But that doesn't mean people aren't willing to do it in companies. But it does take someone poking them to ask them to do it. So to put it back on sort of the professors to look at if they're looking for interesting coursework and open source stuff, and they have a particular open source project in mind, look it up, see if there's a company behind it, because there usually is, and ping some of the developers there and say, hey, do you guys have a project for my class? Or even if you're a student in the class and say you want to do an independent study, find an open source project, contact the person, a really active developer, and say, look, I want to do an independent study next semester. Can you give me a project that would work on this open source project? And I bet, with a few tries, you'd probably find a lot of people that would be willing to help and would take the time out to actually do it. But getting them to just sort of spontaneously do it probably isn't going to happen.
I was just going to add to kind of answer your question. I'm currently a master's student in the School of Business for Information Technology Management, and kind of continuing to this point, there was a class last semester called System Analysis and Design with Professor Elliot Rich, and he actually had a contact at Price Chopper, and they have a new website called Shop for You that you can order online, and it was great to see actually members from Price Chopper's software development team coming in to talk to our class, and we actually, for our semester-long project, had to create an Access database or write an app in Java to simulate a website that would do this. When we did our final presentations, people from Price Chopper's software team came in and not only critiqued us, but some of them were able to actually take a couple ideas that the students had come up with for their project. So that was great to see academia and local business actually kind of combining forces. So that's a testament to SUNY Albany that they're doing that already. So
How long was the project?
it was a semester-long project.
Semester.
Yeah.
Chris.
So none of you guys are trying to run at a loss, obviously. And so there's a certain amount of investment associated with creating partnerships in academia. What are some of the things that you think academia could do to help increase the return on investment, either to speed up training time or to the ability to onboard people? Like where the devil's in the details? Like what are those details and what are the problems that sort of face these partnerships at a sort of integrated level?
I think that creative opportunity, like that project, that was an opportunity for a company to be part of that. Basically, this event, those are the kind of stuff the academy can do, is basically create and foster those opportunities where we can join forces and work together. So that should be the first time, because if be open-minded, say, okay, we have different areas, we can plan like a game, healthcare, just give opportunities so we can get engaged and give us the time to learn about the event so we can be prepared and adjust our message to the event. Sometimes we receive maybe a week before, there's no time for us to be prepared. But kind of partnership, I think, is very key, so they can work together, developing, like people do the say, and the time blocks. Okay, for the next semester, maybe we can develop this a small project. This, as you know, it really has to be the beginning and the end. So that kind of stuff is going to help us to be more effective and get a better return on investment.
So the one thing I'll say to that, we've interviewed a lot of people to work for us. A lot of times when it's come out of college, they don't have much real world experience. They've worked on code internally for school and stuff. And then when they get into the real world, they're like kind of lost at what are all the tools around that, or really using legacy stuff. So I think anything more realistic projects like the Price Chopper one, stuff like that, to help students get kind of a real world experience while they're in school, not just kind of theoretical stuff about computer science, stuff like that.
Right, so then you look at the motivation, you know, why would a company want to do this? And mostly I'd probably say, you know, along the lines of recruiting. So then what's the company going to want? It's going to want people that can start really quick and ramp up. So what's the company want? It's going to want people that know how to use the tools, you know, the version control, you know, testing, you know, the whole package of tools, and come into the company and be productive as soon as possible. You know, I've interviewed plenty of people over the past, you know, 20 years, and some of them come out of college and they know almost nothing, and then some of them are like, you know, it's like they've been working for the past 2 years somewhere. Somehow, you know, you want more of those people. Like they've been working.
Oh yeah, maybe go to that.
Want more of that.
So for us, it's our mission is to just introduce these options as far as inventing. So when we work with classrooms or teachers or projects or schools or what have you, it's making sure that the project is actually taken seriously. Because I can go in and I can present and it can be, you know, a nice thing and everyone likes it. But until you take it seriously, no one does it. But you'd be surprised how many classrooms I go to, and you know, the idea is just for me to come in and speak, but it doesn't really, you don't engage what you're listening to until you actually have to implement it. So I think that's what went really well in the class that we did, was that they had to do something to get a grade. I mean, I was getting emails all night long. I do know when students are awake now. But it was really interesting, and it just, there's such a difference between both ways, that having a hard project or something that means something in a classroom setting is more useful for us.
Let me preface my remarks by familiarizing you with the two most dreaded words in government: culture change. That's the hardest thing for any governmental department to do. And in fact, we're in the midst of a culture change for the entire software industry. So my needs are different than the for-profit corporations. We're a nonprofit, so we're not going to get a lot of monetary reward for affiliating with universities. What we are going to do is help expand the community. And the more people who understand what open source is about, and the more people participate in it, the better off it is for everybody. In particular, our little corner of the world for electronic health records, that in itself is a reward for us. So part of our budget, part of our reason for existence is the outreach and the community building and culture change. So for us, being there and doing it is reward enough. These guys, of course, need money. But that's small problem. Yeah.
I could ask a question regarding government, as you just mentioned. If we were living in like a dysfunctional government that needed reform, just imagine.
So we're doing a hypothetical there?
Hypothetical,
Okay.
exactly. And let's just say we were, for years, voting with like lever voting machines, and now we're going to change. And we're going to go to, you know, I walk in, I mark my ballot, and then I put it in a scanner. Now, let's say you're in charge of this scanner here, right? Should we be using the scanner that just, it's all composed into ones and zeros, or should we be using open source software that we can double check?
Open source.
All I can say is during the entire question, he was clutching the Osira flyer, right, like this. So I was pleased with the whole question. Just so that's my flyer, right? So.
I don't have a ballot. But you could really
at least you're using it for something. All right. So, but let's talk about that for just a second. You know, the obvious answer that you want is open source. Frankly, from my standpoint, I want it to work. And this is something that Roger Baker said about scheduling for the VA. He said, I don't want the best open source product. I want the best product. I would like for it to be open source. And that's the way I feel about the voting machine. I think it absolutely has to work correctly, and I prefer it to be open source.
I agree.
I don't know, but could you, this discussion of the voting machine brings to mind what might be a challenge to address this, what's this addressed by? But being a newspaper reader during the period when the electronic voting machines first were proposed, it was utterly shocking and disappointing that hardly any politician or other media figure didn't immediately voice an objection to a voting machine where there is no physical audit trail for votes. So remember that there were these all electronic voting machines where you don't put a ballot into it and the machine scans it, but you peck on a touch screen and you trust the internals of the machine to accumulate a fair vote. But people did not, at that time, people, except perhaps the computer people like us, had no idea what the role of software was in a machine and why, and so they had nothing to lead them to realizing how stupid an idea of a voting machine was purely electronically, especially if it's closed source would be.
And also, I want you to know I passed on the obligatory hanging Chad joke, right?
In my area, and the big problem's always been, there haven't been enough end program. You can't do an end project because there are not enough end programs left. And if there aren't any end programs left, you shouldn't start an end project. Well, we know that M and its internal database more away than any other database. We know it's good, we know it's open source, we know it's cost effective, but it's not been taught in schools in a long, long time. So I want to say thank you to Louis and Louise and to you Albany at least for beginning at least to address that issue and teach some of these programs to others, so you don't have that canard lots of canards about open source programming. One of them, is it doesn't, it's not the latest and greatest and best. Well, it shouldn't be. And people like Louise who teach this are really doing great for the community, for the end community, which is a lot bigger than this one, and it's used significantly in financials all over the country, maybe more in financials than in medical records. But we'll believe me, we'll soak up all your students. That won't be a problem. In the long run. In the short run, we're going to do some things. We'll try to get some things together. But in the long run, we'll soak up everyone you have. We'll be able to soak it up easily. I just want people in this room to understand. It used to be Dick Walters at the University of California, Santa Barbara, who was the champion. Now it's Louise. I appreciate it, and others around the country appreciate it.
And actually, going back to the idea of open source, that you can study from the code and learn more. What you mentioned, M code, you can, with just basic, millions of lines of code that you can learn and study and improve. And also the stuff they're trying to do, like Luis is trying to show, is not just work in the end code, but learn how you can push all the new technology, web browser, mobiles, and all this new technology, and build all the bridges that are going to communicate with a very solid core system. So that's where you start interacting new technologies with very powerful and proven technology already in the market.
So you're speaking about creating partnerships to develop the next generation of computer science and computer engineering students to carry the banner forward and make this culture shift and this paradigm shift really stick. Software doesn't vacuum. What do you think needs to be done from a non-technical perspective, from the MBA students or the non-computer nerds in the room, so that way you can have another set of champions to carry this forward?
I'll give a quick start, and that is, the young gentleman here that's in the management school for managing of technology. The same principle applies. Future technology managers need to understand the open source paradigm. Okay? And in a lot of cases right now they don't. And so if you're going to attempt to be an architect or a manager, you need to understand where the relative advantages are for commercial patented products versus open source. And you need to be able to utilize that distinction and understand how it fits in an overall plan. And Roger Baker, former CIO of the VA, classic example of a management guy who understood where it needed to go and basically mandated some culture change within the VA. But it has to be part of the business school MIS curriculum just as much as it has to be part of the IT curriculum.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Really, it's not going to be successful if we just have developers and programmers understanding the open source. We don't have the business side. Basically, we need to, it's kind of the hard part actually as a company to understand the business model of the open source. Because it's, the whole company, we're prepared to do business creating software. So right now they need to find other way of doing, finding resources. That's the reason I was talking, it's a difference between the open source and the business. Because you can have open source products that are paid by customers. The only difference is just you donate that software and they can keep paying for the next releases. So, but we need the management to understand that they can do business and at the same time do open source.
And I think, so when I speak to students outside of the IT world about IP, they fall asleep or glaze over. That's just talking. It's just how nobody wants to hear about patents because it just turns off. Same thing when you talk to, lawyers or non-IT people about software. It's the same glaze over. There has to be some kind of integration early on so that people understand and use open source. Like I went to USPTO software roundtable, and they're soliciting people within the open source world. And you could present and do all these things at this roundtable, but you had to use PowerPoint as your presentation. And they didn't understand that people don't use PowerPoint, and there's actually other things out there. That their response was, oh no, everyone uses it. Well, no, everyone specifically that you invited to this is not using it. So it's introducing these aspects, both worlds if you want, or just introducing it to younger generations and having it available. If you have school assignments, maybe, I know growing up I had to turn everything in, Microsoft Form, So it's having that kind of availability and just that understanding that there are options, and, talking about it from an early stage, so that people don't glaze over, that if they do it because they already know everything.
Interestingly, if I can add one more comment, that this is an area where industry is not going to teach academia about this. It's going to be the other way around. And the reason is you've got a whole software industry out there that's very entrenched in the traditional model. So Kevin said, we have an annual summit meeting, and one of the most interesting and well-attended pieces of last year's was the open source business model. And there are people there from companies like IBM, SAIC, Harris, and others trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, how do I make money if I give the software away? And literally they're asking that question. And the answer to a lot of people in this room is obvious, right? But there are a lot of senior managers and mid-managers, mid-level managers out there who don't get how they can do that. And so a generation of well-trained graduates of either MS or MBA programs who understand the open source business model will go a long way toward facilitating this culture change. And I think in this case, academia will lead rather than follow.
I take issue with that. I don't know that it's obvious. In fact, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how open source makes money. And there's very subtle ways of doing it, and there's very easy ways that are not different from I sell a widget. It's just cloaked differently. So I think the business model is not so easy to understand, and what you guys could bring to academia is an example of a business model that may work for a little bit or may work to a certain degree. And once we get an idea of all the different types of business models that figure out how to extract some monetization out, it would help, I think, in a couple ways. One, it reassures the students that, okay, if I spend some time on this open source stuff, I'm going to get a payoff someday. But more importantly, I think it lets them know that both in the code and in the business, there's a hack space there. We don't have all the answers on how to get money out of open source. We're looking to them to build the companies that get money out of open source and to think about the different ways that you could possibly make a living through open source. So there could be some exchange back and forth there.
Good point.
And also not just MBA and master students. This great course I think he described, but most people are not MBAs or master students. Most people are bachelor or undergrads. We need to teach them. There's lots of undergrads who've made a boatload of money, or not even undergrads who've made a boatload of money in the tech space. So you don't need the master's degree to figure this stuff out.
And to that point, like Agora Games, we are not, we don't make money off of open source software per se, but we open source a lot of tools. Like one of our best success stories, we used a messaging protocol called AMQP. We wrote our own driver, we put it out there. The company who actually wrote Rabbit, they sponsored the project, they helped add features to it, fix bugs in it, and we get the benefit from that now. And that, as a company, we've built a better product because we've open sourced that driver. So it doesn't necessarily help our bottom line, but we got to build a better product because we open source part of our technology.
And your point is really valid. I think we are all exploring different approaches, how they can make business and at the same time do an open source. Some of them will say, okay, we can release the latest version of the software to those customer advanced subscription, and we gave like 2 versions behind or 2 years behind to the open source community. So that's a different approach. They call it subscription model. So I think we are still kind of young age in how to explore that. There are different ideas, and companies are really open. They're looking for different approaches. Like he was explaining that we have the same track this year, and we're trying to figure out what kind of presentation really will help to understand the business model, and at least to find other ways of doing it.
I think one of the things that, when I say, software development company, what do you think of? I think it's someone that sells some sort of shrink wrap thing, but I think like 70% of software development is done by organizations that they don't sell software. They do other stuff. They're in manufacturing. They're doing all kinds of everything. Not just selling shrink wrap software. And those make a lot of sense as open source a lot of times. And the business they're doing, they're getting paid to solve someone's problem. And they've been doing that. And whether they give the source code out or not, I mean, if they do, like you were saying, it actually benefits the company because they get some extra people helping them with the code, and it helps other companies. Companies get a little skittish of that because they only give a competitive advantage to someone else. So they might want to figure out, make sure they're not doing that, or make sure that if they are doing that, they'll still remain on top. But a lot of software isn't just, creating this and selling it to someone else. A lot of the software development is just some in-house developer at either a government or a company, and that needs to be taught around, to the
hospitals.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah, I'd like to expand the tool a little bit and piggyback on some earlier remarks. Talk about technology management coming from IT people, MIS, MBAs, while we're in the capital of New York, what about from PAs, public administration? Federal people are here, state people are here, and health administration. Maybe some kind of interdisciplinary technology management.
Somebody has a question. I would like to follow on the point that Alex made. And I think it's applied to kind of balance that it's not only businesses, but also academia. So there are reward systems and kind of traditions and ways of doing things on both sides. Companies need contracts and budgets and schedules. And in academia, you need curriculum and procedures and grades. And there is a space in between. There is a space in the middle where there are things that we can do without contracts, and there are things that we can do also outside of the curriculum that do not require 10 years of reform and meetings and discussions. And so I would like to just put that topic in the table and think of, instead of thinking too much about the challenge, think more about the opportunities. What are the spaces where academia can do without having to ask for permission? And what are the spaces where organizations can work without having to go through lengthy procedures? How can we build that hack space in between and make it more effective? If anyone wants to
Yeah. That question is too hard.
So I'm just saying. Do the question again. Try one more time. We'll get this.
So I'm trying to go back to the problem of culture or the issue of culture. So coming from a government or businesses, when you confront a project, some of the questions that people are asking the audience, you will start by crafting requirements, defining a contract, sketching a budget, and then actually start executing, and then you track it. So that's the organized, rational, responsible way of moving a project. Now, in between, there are places where you could go and ask for the students to help you. You will not put those students in your budget. You probably cannot put them in your schedule. But you probably would want to have those students. And on the other side, in academia, those are opportunities for the students to learn, but it's hard sometimes in a class. So if one of the students from my class wanted to participate in a project for you, it would be hard for me to grade them and give them rewards in the standard system. So I'm looking for that space where there are things that you can do outside of that regimented way of working, and in spaces where academia can work outside of the traditional mechanisms, and still get benefits in both directions. Because we know that those things happen when a student goes back and spends 1 week in a company, or when a speaker from a company comes and talks to a class. And both of those things happen with you having to sign a contract, or us having to change the curriculum.
Well, I think that the new approach of doing agile development, kind of Scrum, that could be a good opportunity for them to be engaged in the short period of time inside the project, because they can be focused. I don't know if you're familiar with Scrum, they have like they call sprints, which you have like a 2-week sprints and 4-week sprints. They start with one component, but at the end of the sprint, they need to have that component finished and do a demonstration. That could be an opportunity, but sometimes it's going to be hard for those students that are not familiar with the tools they're using. But maybe that student can take part of one of the component or one of the tools, how to manage the tool, how to be part of the team. It can be documentation, it can be different roles. So I think that the next step is try to identify those small pieces they can do without requiring a lot of knowledge. QA as an example. They can be doing the QA testing of that component in the Scrum project is going to be maybe a month. That's going to be a start and finish because they were participating at the beginning of the sprint, learning what they need to be released. And then at the end, they need to verify if what was created by the developer is really meeting those requirements. So that could be a kind of idea how they can be engaged in a short period of time inside big projects.
Also, if I understood your question correctly, one of the benefits of the open source stuff is it is open. So for grading purposes or whatever you do in the open source community, everybody has access to that. So you can see what a student has done over a period of time. Like an example that comes in my head, Google Summer of Code, where they actually pay the student for a summer to work on code, and then they can get college credit or whatever the school will allow. So I think like the grading a student based on what he does in the open source world is kind of makes it easy because all that stuff is just open. If a teacher, for a developer, just send your commits to the teacher so they can review or whatever, stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of ways that academia can see what a student is doing in the open source world and give them credit for that.
Any other questions from the list?
So just as I want to bring it back to the whole open source and the whole issue. Because
voting again.
I want to bring it back to voting because voting in New York, right? You fill out a piece of paper, and there may be traceability, but you have no idea. You put the piece of paper in, you get a little green light. A little green light that says, trust me, I counted it. You get no feedback whether the software read it correctly. You get no indication of what it thinks you cast your votes for. And right. And my question is, can you imagine an open source project with real active community and consensus designing a UI that essentially fails any objective test of confidence in the voting process?
So are you asking, is it possible for it to fail?
No, what I'm asking is, it's not even about whether the software is good or not. The question is, when we look at an open source project, it's driven by the user community, by the community that cares about it. And this is just an abject example of the cathedral model, right? I mean, somebody said these are the specs. This is what it'll do. Now I'm asking you to imagine what should this look like if this were developed by an open source community, so you can better answer the question whether you're going to have open source software or closed source software. It's not just that the software works; you have to have confidence in it, right?
Sure, but I don't think the open source is going to guarantee that it's going to be fantastic.
No,
it's definitely not. And certainly, I've seen some broken open source communities that have various odd agendas that where they have separate user bases. Half the users want to do this, some of them want to do that. And the guy that wants to do it's got some narrow view of the world, and that's the way he does it, right? Marches down that, and and then people can fork the projects, and all kinds of crazy stuff can happen. But if it's got enough heft, it keeps bowling down the road in directions that baffle a lot of people. So just making it open wouldn't necessarily solve that problem, but you'd think it would. But my guess is there was some reason that we don't know, that someone said it had to be like that. Probably why it is.
Well, part of the issue there, I've been in the security business for a long time, and one of the things that's sort of losing its luster, but what's originally a very impressive idea was security through obscurity, right? So yeah, we know how the voting software is secure because nobody's seen the source, right? Not going to hack it if they can't see the source. Well, that model is kind of losing its shiny now, right? But nevertheless, I still don't care so much about whether the source is open or not, but I would have been interested to see what would happen if you had open testing on it, right? Because open testing would probably establish the same level of confidence that you're talking about if people could bang on it, everybody could bang on it and satisfy themselves that it did what it said it was going to do. So, one way or the other, you really want that to work.
Just to follow up, we have a president who was quoted as saying trust and then
Verify, yes.
Right, but now with this, we're trusting and we're trusting. We're not verifying. I mean, let's say you had a dysfunctional government. Whoever's programming that scanner.
I think you did say that actually earlier.
Well, that's true. I'm sorry, you're right. I mean, let's just say I'm a right-wing, I'm in the upper 1/10% up there. I'm doing whatever they tell me to do. I'm programming this scanner. And of course, it's in ones and zeros, so nobody can see what I've done. So if they tell me, look at 1 plus, you say 1 plus 1 equals 2. No. If it's that party, 1 plus 1 equals 0. If it's this party, 1 plus 1 equals 3. I can program that, right? Now, maybe not every ballot, because that would be crazy, but let's say every 10th ballot, right? 9 out of 10 are correct. But the 10th ballot, every 10th ballot, 1 plus 1 equals 0 for their party, 1 plus 1 equals 3 for my party. I can do that, right?
Yep.
Right, so I'm just saying that, I really think that open source would be much better than just trusting, instead of verifying.
Open source does not imply